I swear to God, I'm going to record this a million times until I get this right. Now, I just want to let you know this is a piece that I wrote in 2011, and I'm posting it largely because I wanted to get away from talking about race and, maybe start talking about politics. Why not? Anyway, preface number one. This is preface number two. Now, I've gone all over in my life from right-leaning moderate, family-influenced Democrat to ardent center-leaning Green Party idealist to aggressive socialist asshole, and have reached a point where no political philosophy truly speaks to me anymore. At this point, I can tell you is that I'm liberal in ideology and fairly conservative in practice. I don't see a lot of the benefits in capitalism, but I think reverting to some other system would be, needlessly reactionary and ill-fated. If I had to break down my political philosophy and put it under the banner of a slogan, a name, if you will, I'd call myself a social humanist. Now, that is, I believe in the usefulness of statism in terms of providing cultural groups with a means of organizing and maximizing the quality of life of their constituents, but I also understand the importance of the individual within the context of cultural growth. I think that if there must be a capital-based economic system, it is not only the right, but the duty of the state to ensure capital does not become the determinant of cultural change, and that it is not only the duty, but the right of the state to cultivate the physical and intellectual potential of its citizens. Reciprocally, I feel it is the duty of the citizen to maximize their understanding of themselves and all others around them while contributing to the social good. If they can't find a way to do it themselves, they may choose avenues offered by the state. Now, if any of this is vague, I'm sorry. I'm not an economist, nor am I truly a political scientist. I'm just a dude trying to figure out his way in the world just like anyone else. And now I'm going to needlessly conjecture some invective against libertarianism. Okay, so I've tried very, very hard over the course of the past decade or so to try to ascribe some semblance of respectability to libertarianism. There's something inherently cute about it. Naive, even. A sense of idealistic wishful thought that I, as a man whose passions, if not overt political loyalties, lie hip-deep in socialism, can at least appreciate. However, with the Tea Party inexplicably attempting to establish a foothold in contemporary political discourse, and self-proclaimed libertarians coming out of the closet en masse, I've been forced to actively examine it, partly to separate the real folk from the funk fakers, and partly to ascertain whether or not my gut reaction, these motherfuckers are crazy, is correct or not. Now, my current frame of mind, I hesitate to use the term conclusion as my thoughts on the subject will continue to grow and reshape as my understanding of life, and such matters does the same, is that libertarianism, like anarchism, a really interesting idea. One born of the knowledge of existing limitations and processes of current socio-political and economic systems. It's also fucking terrifying, and here's why. 1. Libertarianism, within an economic context, assumes an economic equal playing field that does not exist. Now, white people in the Western world have championed the idea of equal opportunity arguably since the Industrial Revolution. In the United States, they even went so far as to include it in the Constitution, sort of. The problem being, for as noble as the notion of humanity's equal right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of the capacity to own, that's my substitution, I always thought property was as much a misnomer as happiness, may seem, history has suggested and continues to suggest that white, male, heterosexual rich people have the easiest track towards acquiring them. Now, the easiest measure of this is clearly the presidency of the United States of America. Now, some people, they like to point to the obvious example of Barack Obama's election as the sign that things are different, to which I simply point to the 42 white guys before Barack Obama and say, when America elects its 43rd black president, then we can talk. Oh, excuse me, half black. The argument also extends itself to earnings and holdings, so I don't put any stock in the idea that, well, people are earning a lot more is worth mentioning. Sure, there are minorities, homosexuals, women, etc., who earn more money. Everybody's earning more money because the amount of money in the global economic system has increased with, but sadly not directly correspondent to, the increase in global population. That there are millionaires in the ranks of ethnic and sexual minorities now doesn't mean we're all equal, because there's still a shitload of people who have a tougher time achieving that bullshit fantasy known as the American dream because they had the misfortune of being born poor. The idea that a completely ungoverned free market is somehow the cure to economic disparity is complete bullshit. Deregulating business and industry has never resulted in anything other than disaster, either from an economic standpoint, now we can point to Cal Coolidge exacerbating the Great Depression, or maybe the Bush administration exacerbating the current economic downturn we're in, or from an environmental standpoint. And I don't need to come up with examples. Look, pretty much the Industrial Revolution began humanity's ultimate fuckery of the ecosystem. That's fact. Moreover, it's been proven repeatedly that success in any market economic system almost invariably comes not as a result of quality of work, but by simply being able to outlast the competition. To rephrase, in capitalism you don't usually win so much as you lose least. Barring some scorched earth scenario in which all the world's richest families somehow go extinct, thereby dividing their assets into the larger system, even a so-called free market economy will still have a hierarchy based on existing capital, one that won't be broken no matter who comes along, which leads me to my second point. Libertarian economic theory naively assumes innovation is the engine of productivity, ignoring its culturally subjective origins. Okay, now I admit most of my vitriol on this point stems from the discovery that the nebulous they have, in fact, made a cinematic adaptation of Atlas Shrugged, one of the most ridiculous fucking things ever committed to print. Now, lest I go off on another rant a la my Watchmen dissection, I'll simply assume you've either read the book or Wikipedia'd, Cliff's Notes it, and skipped to the thrust of the fucking novel. That the people who drive the engine of industry and the market economy are clearly the people with the best ideas, the most knowledge, and are therefore deserving the most power. And that all legislative regulation of business is somehow the evil collectivistic mono-consciousness hoping to sweep away all notion of individuality from Western society. Run-on sentences aside, I hope you were able to catch the scent of ideological bullshit. Now, since we've previously established that hegemony in a market economy is almost exclusively the province of people who have had resources from the get-go, the objectivist argument clearly believes that the progenitors of said hegemony deserve the power in the first place because they obviously had the best ideas, which is why their power became hegemonic in the first place. Now, I don't consider myself to be all-knowing, or even all-intelligent, but the fact that even I'm able to see this as complete horseshit makes me wonder what the Austrian school and laissez-faire economists are smoking to make them think there's any logical merit to this. Now, there's no way anyone can look at objectivist economic argument and not see an obvious bias in favor of post-industrial, Euro-American hegemonic power. Now, so basically, according to their theory, the economic systems or lack thereof were applicable, used by the indigenous populations of the United States or of the other Americas, clearly deserved to cease to exist because they weren't useful to the Europeans who came over, and clearly deserved to establish their dominance on the indigenous folks' ancestral land. Now, maybe that's looking at it too abstractly, but it still works within specifics because the bottom line of any market economy is that it's not driven by innovation. At least not in the sense that it's not always the most effective or most functionally capable product that succeeds. In fact, since humanity has basically run out of space to do anything other than consume, the notion of the most useful invention being the most successful has gone the way of the Iroquois. White people even came up with a word that means not actually the best product, but the easiest one to sell. Marketable. The notion that use inexorably determines usefulness is pretty ambitious and hopeful, but unfortunately it depends upon definitions of useful that weren't created with functionality in mind. Just ask any fan of Sega hardware. In fact, it is the pure subjectivity of the market that effectively repudiates objectivism and, by extension, libertarian economic theory. I mean, it's what I mean when I say, as I always do, that there is no free market. It can be argued that Eurocentric white society killed the only free market there was, but lacking the practical and academic knowledge of indigenous American cultures, that would be both unfair and inaccurate. Not that it's going to stop me from putting it out there, of course. Which leads me 1,500 words into my next and, for now at least, final point. 3. Social libertarianism is too inextricably tied to the biases and systemic disparities created by market economics to be anything other than a means of unjustly enabling a select group of people to survive at the cost of others. That is a mouthful. Now, I suppose I'm unfairly equating libertarian with advocating the minimization of state influence, allowing the individual to determine the course of society, but that seems to be the only real thing uniting all factions of libertarianism within the current U.S. political climate, or the only thing separating libertarians themselves from logically thinking people who don't necessarily lump themselves into a clearly compartmentalized philosophical category. Now, it'd be nice to live in a society in which people truly have the right to do as they please without having to exist under the domain of a state. It'd also be nice to exist in a place in which there was an infinite amount of space and resources, in which there was an equal division of everything. See, that's the thing about libertarianism that gets me the most. It relies upon the notion of all things being equal and reduces the ills of society to be exclusively within the will of the people committing those acts that constitute said ills. Okay, now this is how you can tell where the concepts of American libertarianism come from. Now, it accepts that coercion and violence exist within American culture, and recognizes the need for an overarching authority to protect citizens from it, yet it doesn't acknowledge exactly what makes people violent and coercive. Now, sure, there are a fair amount of fucked up evil people out there that commit crimes just because they can. I mean, there's going to be a number of that in any society. But there's an even larger amount of people who do fucked up shit because they either A, lack the education to know better than to do it, or B, are made desperate by desperate situations. To put it another way, a libertarian assumes a mugger is a mugger because he doesn't want to be a banker. Or a drug dealer is a drug dealer because he doesn't want to be a police officer. Now, the reality is the average mugger has neither the investment capital nor practical knowledge to be a banker, and the average drug dealer has figured out they can make more money selling drugs than working their way up through the ranks of a so-called honest profession. Now, I'm not trying to excuse violent or criminal behavior. I'm just pointing out that libertarians are quick to paint those who commit crimes as people who don't deserve to be in society because they take advantage of the rights society gives them. Now, that is, of course, unless it's a right they believe in, and then all of a sudden the individual motivations of a criminal become chiefly important. I mean, you can say what you will about libertarians ostensibly being against the U.S.'s stupid drug laws, but they do seem to care a whole lot more about the right to bear arms than the legalizing marijuana. Because, really, the substance of American libertarianism can be summed up in 3 words. Unless it's mine. The government shouldn't intervene on behalf of anyone's rights, unless it's my right to own a gun or get money, from having a company. The government shouldn't intervene in business or industry, unless it's my property that's being taken away from me. The government should allow the private sector to create and manage infrastructure, unless the private sector decides it wants to create and manage infrastructure where mine currently happens to be. Now, I suppose it's important to mention that I do think some aspects of libertarian philosophy do make sense, and they ought to be examined and maybe in a moderate way practiced, but I also want to mention that, my beef isn't really with libertarians themselves. I mean, I guess. Sorry, libertarians. But my beef is not with you. It's just with the ideology. I mean, there are people I know whom I think consider themselves libertarian, whose opinions I actually do respect and value. But I can't trust American libertarianism on the whole because it's so tied to the notion of a free market, completely overlooking things like white privilege and white hegemonic power. Or the fact that much of what libertarians consider to be their divine right was, in fact, obtained largely through the machinations of a strong central government. In turn, I can't fully respect those who wholeheartedly and myopically embrace the movement, because they are, in essence, trying to say the past 400 years didn't happen while embracing the results which are proof of the fact that they very much did. Just a thought.